Welcome and thank you for joining us at Championship Conversations in the Final Four Watch Party presented by 12 Inches Over. We first want to acknowledge the land that we stand on here at Arizona State University, belonging to the Maricopa and Pimas people. So thank you for joining us for Champion Conversations. Today, Dr. Edwards and Dr. Scott Brooks, as well as Geoff Arnold, will discuss how coaches get the most out of their teams. We'll talk about coaches from Bill Walsh to C.Vivian Stringer, Tony Dungy, and Dawn Staley. Dr. Harry Edwards is a renowned sociologist and author whose distinguished career focused on the connections between race, sport, and society. He is a scholar, educator, and advocate for African American athletes and leading authority on sociology of sport and diversity. Dr. Scott Brooks is the director of the Global Sport Institute and also an associate professor of sociology in the School of Social and Family Dynamics here at Arizona State University. Later in the conversation, we will have Dr. Edwin C. Moses, Geoff Arnold, and Veronica Taylor. Dr. Edwin C. Moses is a track and field icon, winning gold medals in both 1976 and 1984. He has 2 world championships and broke the world record 4 times as a 400-meter hurdler. He remains undefeated with 122 consecutive races spanning a period of 9 years, 9 months, and 9 days. He is an activist, humanitarian, dope human being, and co-founder of the Laureus Foundation. And now I'd like to introduce our host and the Director of Research here at the Global Sport Institute, Dr. Scott Brooks.
Thank you, Rob, for that. All right, so we're going to get right into it. Doc, I thought of you when I thought of Championship Week. One, of course, thinking of your relationship with Bill Walsh and what you all built together, really learning about, I got a sense of how to think about teams based on hearing your conversations. You talking about how the things that you and Coach Walsh would talk about, and then the relationships you've had with so many other coaches, whether we're talking about a George Raveling, you're close with, of course, the indomitable Bill Russell, and so on. And so I wanted just to start with coaches and the role of coaches. We don't talk enough about that, but what's the role of coaches as you see it when it comes to championship teams?
Well, let me begin by saying that I've worked with some of the greatest coaches that this country has ever produced. And I have the championship rings, like I have to show the little 5- and 6-year-old kids when I'm sitting on the curb and they ask me a question and I say something, they say, that old dude is lying. So I'm just saying that I have the rings from Bill Walsh in 85 to Billy Donovan in 2006 and 7 when we went back to back. So I know what I'm talking about and I know what it took to get there. So I have a drawer full of safe deposit box full of rings and so forth to prove it. But having worked with coaches from, like you say, Bill Walsh to John Thompson, Bob Knight, I still have letters from Bob Knight, Dale Brown, most certainly Billy Donovan, George Raveling, and so forth, I learned a lot about how you deal with changing times as a coach. Women's sports have particular problems, particularly today, and challenges. And I just want to touch on that very briefly as well. But sport inevitably recapitulates society. Coming out of World War II, you had a coaching regimen where the athletes and the coaches had that experience. And so a coach would say jump and the athlete would say how high, because that top-down kind of authoritative structure was what they had been accustomed to. That's what won the war for us, and it carried over into sports. Sports always recapitulates society. By the 1960s, young people who didn't have that experience were challenging authority. So a coach would say, jump, and the response would be, why? And he had to explain why that was the case. And today, we're looking at NIT, we're looking at the transfer portal and so forth. A coach says jump, and if the athlete don't like it, he says bye. And that's that. So we have to understand the character of the times that we're living in. With women, it's become particularly challenging because when people talk about Title IX in 1972, but what they don't talk about enough is the impact that Roe v. Wade had in 1973 which gave organizations, pro and collegiate, the assurance that if they gave a woman a contract in May, if they gave her a scholarship in May, she'd be around in September to start school and around in March to play in March Madness and around in June to run in the NCAA championships or the Olympic trials and so forth. Well, so much of that has gone away with the rescinding of Roe and with the literal assault on other aspects of women's medical challenges to such an extent that there's a trend today to reconsign women to reproductive bondage, which is a existential threat against women's sports. So when I look at people like C.Vivian Stringer and what they were able to do, Dawn Staley, and what they've been able to do, I'm very concerned in the current atmosphere about how do they coach and how do they recruit and how do their schools handle these circumstances where women's medical services are under such intense assault. Some things, however, hold up. One thing that I think is critically important that still prevails is that a coach cannot get an athlete to care about anything until that athlete believes and is confident that that coach cares about them. And that means that you have to understand the athlete that you're dealing with. You have to understand that you're recruiting not just an individual, but a family and a culture. And somehow or another, you have to relate to that and communicate through that to that athlete more so today than at any other time, because they can jump on in the transfer portal and be gone. The second thing is a great coach is a great teacher. That's the first thing. You must be a great teacher. You must be able to incite, inspire, and help to support the athletes that you recruit. We can get into exactly what that entails later, but I would start with those factors kind of setting the stage and the scene for where we are today. A lot of coaches are going to get out of the business. I mean, you listen to Nick Saban, one of the most successful coaches in history, and he's saying, hey, it's gotten crazy out here. There are other coaches that I know who made up their mind, I can't coach anymore. I can't coach in this environment anymore. And so those are the things I think we have to be focused on if we're going to talk about the coaching profession in this day and age.
No, that's a great starting point. I got my partner with me, Geoff Arnold, 30-plus year college basketball coach at a bunch of different universities. And I know Geoff's got, hearing you talk about teams and talking about how much coach cares, I know that piqued some interest in Geoff.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Edwards, and thank you, Dr. Moses, for joining us today. One of the things that I picked up very quickly in your introduction, you're saying that you had been in touch with so many great coaches through history. One of the things that I wanted to quick ask you, because we like to go back and try to find the secrets of life, I could say, on 12 Inches Over. We're trying to help everybody get better. What were the similarities of all these great coaches? You talked about Coach Thompson. You talked about Coach Stringer. You talked about working with Coach Walsh. You talked about multiple people. What were the similarities that each one of these coaches carried, the trait that you thought that everybody had?
From Bill Walsh right down to the great Billy Donovan, John Thompson, most certainly George Raveling, they were all great teachers. They were all great teachers. They had that optimum mix relative to their players of respect, affection, and authority. Respect their players believed that if their coach had 24 hours, I don't care who they were playing, he could put them in a position where they were best situated to win a game. They had that much respect for his technical proficiency. And then affection wasn't about being liked, because most of the players that I talked to about these great coaches didn't like them all the time, but they loved them almost unconditionally. Bill Walsh, well, I was surprised when I went to work with the 49ers and found out that most of that locker room didn't like him. But boy, don't let anybody say anything about him that was negative. You would think that they had said something about somebody's mama. I mean, they loved him almost unconditionally. And what this meant was that they found out on team after team after team that it was all right to love each other, irrespective of whether or not you liked them. You love them because they're your teammates. And if a coach doesn't generate that love that they recognize and embrace, the players do not generate that type of sense of love for each other. And players don't play for the audience. They don't play for the camera. They play for each other. They know that they're going to be there for each other. So that was also something that was very common, that affection element. And then the third thing was authority. A lot of coaches confuse authority with fear, but it is not fear. It's authority. It's a recognized legitimacy that the players have in terms of what the coach's latitude is as far as getting things done. This is one of the great flaws, I think, in the transfer portal dimension of where we are today. Because if an athlete doesn't feel comfortable, he just ups and moves. Even if he does feel comfortable and there's a better NIL deal someplace else, he's gone. Well, what that does is it weakens the fabric of the relationship between the coach and the player. There has to be that authority there. There has to be that affection there. There has to be that respect there. And that is what is the foundation of being a great teacher. And every one of those coaches that I named were great teachers above all else.
Man. You know, Doc, I think back to you telling stories of how Bill Walsh twisted each level of player. I want you to talk a little bit about how he got the most out of each kind of category of player. So those categories as you've put them in, and then how he tightened that screw down.
First time I saw him do it, I thought, oh man, they're gonna walk away from this guy. We were about 6-2 or something like that. And Bill Walsh had 3 groups of athletes that he called into his office. He called in Ronnie Lott and Joe Montana, Roger Craig, Jerry Rice, Keena Turner, Eric Wright, and said to them, you are my very best players. You leave everything not only on the game field, you leave everything on the practice field every day. You're the first ones out there, the last ones to leave. You're the last ones to leave the film room. You're the first one in the breakout room. And then he looked at him and said, I got to have more. And sure enough, because what he was telling them is that there's still more to give. Then there was a second group that he would call in and say, when I brought you guys in here, I was looking for players who could not step up, but who could step in. If we have to step up, we're already done. What have you been doing all this time except from picking up a paycheck? You got to step in. That's where your head has got to be. That's where your preparation has got to be. And if you don't do that, then I'm going to have to make some decisions about whether or not I made a mistake in bringing you in. He will get those players. All of a sudden, hey, they realize there's a big difference between stepping up and stepping in, and began to focus on the latter. And then there was a third group of players that he would bring in, and tell them, you know what, you guys have got to do more. You've got to show me more in practice. You've got to show me more in putting on the other team's plays. You've got to show me more effort and concentration and preparation when we take the field, and you have to run other teams' plays. And if you don't, I'm going to get rid of somebody. And sure enough, at the end of that day, somebody would come in off the practice field and his stuff would be in a box sitting out in front of in a foyer in front of the security desk. And that Bill got every ounce of everything out of his players. He made them greater than they imagined that they could be. And the one thing that kept them with him is that they knew he cared about them. It was not malicious. It was not cantankerous. It was not vengeful. It was, we are better than this, and we can do better. I'm going to have more from everybody. And he did the same thing with his coaching staff. He never chewed out a player on the field or in the locker room. On the field, when something went wrong, he would call the position coach out. What are you doing? Look, we need some blocking here and we're not getting it. And the position coach would go to his guys and say, hey guys, y'all done got me chewed out by the big man. That's not good. That's not good for you. That's not good for us. And they would go out, and I remember once Bubba Parrish had missed a couple of blocks, and Bill made the statement, we got to get something done about this. So he called out McKittrick during practice. He told McKittrick before he went on the field, Bob, today I'm going to chew you out because I got to get more out of the offensive line. That offensive line went out that day and had a perfect practice. And Bill Walsh, about toward the end, looked at Bubba Parrish and said, Bubba, we're supposed to be out here practicing, and here you are standing out here chewing gum. And everybody just cracked up because that's all he could call him out for. But he did that, and I think what happened was Bob McKittrick said, hey, Bill's not satisfied with the level of production, and we're all looking bad. And they went out that day and had a perfect practice. And I talked to Bill about it afterwards, and he said, you know what? He said, I didn't have any choice. I didn't know what else to do. So when I saw Bubba Parrish chewing gum, I just jumped all over him about it. So again, it's all in the context of support. They know that he cares about them as players, as men, as a team. And they know that his greatest goal is to make them care maximally about each other, because that is why they play the game. That is who they play for. That is what the victory is about. And anybody who has been in a championship locker room and see those players afterwards, it all becomes real, and you understand why that coach did the things the way that he has done them. I've been in 4 Super Bowl championship locker rooms. I've been in the basketball NBA championship locker room after a game. I've been in collegiate basketball championship locker room, and it's all the same. They care about each other.
Doc, one of the things that we've clearly found out through 12 Inches Over was the fact that we say that the players don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
You got it. You got it. I mean, that should be on the wall in the coaches' conference room. I mean, until these players believe and are totally convinced that you care about them, they will not care about what you want them to care about most, is each other. First, Bill Walsh was asked, what is the greatest single characteristic of your championship teams, of your Super Bowl championship teams? He said they cared about each other. But they don't get there unless they believe that the coach cares about them. And people slight that because sports is supposed to be this macho, I'm tough, I don't need anybody, It is about love and caring and commitment and contribution and stepping in, being prepared to step in, not step up. Because if you've been prepared to step up, you've been sitting someplace while everybody else been working. So at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. And so many coaches today don't realize how much more important that is at this time of the transfer portal. They're walking on the eggshells. I don't want to alienate this guy. Jesus, if I say so and so, well, you go right at that from day one. Guys, we've got to care about each other. We've got to play for each other. We've got to practice and prepare for each other. And every team, that championship team I've ever been around, prepared for games and practice and so forth like a championship team long before they were champions. But it began by caring for and respecting each other.
You know, thinking about this, Geoff has a story about going to the first BCA that he attended, and he went there with John Chaney and Big John. I want him to talk a little bit about that. The question is, what has changed amongst coaching staff? So within that, so Geoff, go ahead and talk a little bit about your experience.
My first year, I've been a college basketball coach for 32 years. And my first year, the Final Four was in New Orleans, and BCA was had a huge reception. You know, they were having a huge reception. And, you know, I'm a young guy out running around and, let me get to this meeting. So pretty much seats were all taken. But fortunately for me, my high school basketball coach and John Chaney were best friends. They grew up playing in Philly and everything like that. So as I walked in, and I played against Coach Chaney because I went to St. Joe's, I played against Coach Chaney my whole career. So he grabs me and a buddy and says, sit here. Now I sit down not knowing it's George Raveling, Coach Chaney, myself, my buddy, and John Thompson. Like we're sitting,
boy.
Yeah, exactly.
Kings Row.
The Mount Rushmore, and these two young guys are sitting here, and just the at ease that they talked amongst themselves, and they talked about different things, and they allowed us to come into that arena of the way they talked and the way they thought about things. It was incredible because when one guy gets up and the crowd starts clapping, and I'll never forget this, and Coach Thompson didn't hear what they said, and so he leans over and he goes, what we clapping for? And George Raveling down the far ends says the guy's name. And Coach Thompson, and this is our Zoom, Coach Thompson says, oh, I hate that no good son of a bitch. So they let us into their world. And the thing that is not there today, Doc, is that kind of elder statesmanship. You know, the respect of the elder statesmanship of those type of guys. Like I revered those guys, not being able to know Coach Chin, just meeting those other guys, but I revered those guys. We say it now with 12 Inches Over and with our group, the person that is revered like that is playing today at 4 o'clock, Dawn Staley. She's the one that can, that she is revered that way, and people kind of stand up. It's not that way anymore. And I just want to know where that went in your eyes.
Well, it went a couple of places. It was chipped away at. One is that the media personalities outstripped the personal contact and relationships in terms of the images of who and what is important. So now, rather than coming up through the ranks and getting to know a John Thompson, getting to know a John Chaney, getting to know a George Raveling, getting to know a Vivian Stringer or Dawn Staley, or getting to know These people, you can go online and get a whole panoply of people, and you pick your model out of that. And a lot of times it comes down to who's in the media most often, who's getting the most pub, who's getting the most endorsements. Do you see them on with the duck? Do you see them on with the car? And so now all of a sudden, it's not who the greatest contributor and coach and figurehead and who's on Mount Rushmore in terms of the people that they dealt with and the folks that they saved, literally, that we ultimately came to see playing in the NBA or that we ultimately came to see playing in the NFL. It's who's on the media most. And the social media has made that even worse. And when you combine that with the fact that the cult of the personality as opposed to the production and so forth has outstripped that personal contact and mentorship and respect within the profession. When you combine that with the amount of money to be made, not just from the endorsements that you see coaches in, but from their salaries. I mean, you have coaches who are making $8, $9, $10 million a year. And so now all of a sudden, it's not, look at what John Thompson did. Look at what George Raveling did. Look at Billy Donovan, who when Joakim Noah and Brewer and Horton said, we're going to come back in 2007 because one of our five is never going to play in the NBA, but we want him to have something great, like going back to back. So we're going to come back. We're going to walk away from the NBA money because all of them would have been lottery picks. And Billy Donovan's response was, then I'm not going to accept the bonus that I get for winning this national championship in 2006. I'm going to walk away from that. If you guys can walk away from the NBA and come back, then I'm going to walk away from that. That kind of personality and commitment doesn't count for much anymore in the face of the endorsements, the huge salaries, and all that kind of stuff. So at the end of the day, the profession is being victimized by its commercial and media success and the money to be made from that.
So, Doc, I want us to reflect a little bit on consistency and this back-to-back. So the Niners dynasty, we got a bunch of championships in a small time frame. And of course, we've got one of the greatest, if not arguably the greatest winner in Dr. Edwin Moses, who wins for 9 years, 9 months, and 9 days. I want us to move into that, talk about competitiveness. What does it take to be consistent, not just for a year, a season, but over multiple seasons?
Is that for me?
No, I'm going to start with Dr. Edwards. And then
I'll say something very brief. I've been in back-to-back locker rooms at the collegiate level, back-to-back championship locker rooms at the professional level. And the two things that I have seen, three things that I have seen consistently associated with consistency is one, discipline. Two is commitment. And three, taking full advantage of the only shortcut, proven, demonstrable shortcut to consistency and success, which is hard work. Everything else is more difficult and less productive. And so when I see the kind of thing that Bill Walsh preached, we're going to be disciplined. Our offensive line is not going to eat itself out of a season. I expect you to come back to camp in the summer, prepared and ready to practice. We're going to be committed. We're going to be totally committed to The goals that we have in common, not our individual preferences or likes or how we would want it to be, is going to exceed that. And we're going to have to understand that there is a shortcut to getting to where we want to get to. And it's hard work. Everything else is more difficult and less productive.
Yeah. And so, Doc Edwin, this is perfect on two accounts. One, as Doc's reference to the offensive line eating themselves out of a season. And one of the things that you told us is you're only 4 pounds over your running weight. So that's number one. But those things, how do those ring to you? The consistency part. How do you get to be as consistent as 9 years, 9 months, and 9 days without a loss?
Well, what Dr. Edwards said is absolutely true. Discipline, consistency, commitment, and hard work. And I did 3. I was lucky that I grew up in a whole family with a mother and a father. And my father was a disciplinarian. He was a Tuskegee Airman. And he didn't take any crap whatsoever. And he was a principal back in the days when they used to spank, and it was corporal punishment. The discipline part of the equation was well known and expected on certain occasions. But I learned commitment and hard work from both my mom and my father, my mother and the father. They both went to HBCUs. Those were the days when, most of your top Black athletes that went to the NBA and the NFL were from HBCUs, from Savannah State and Alcorn and Southern and all that. I come from that generation as well. And I was a scientist, so I was very disciplined and lucky that I went to, took chemistry, took physics, took biology, and did laboratory reports and learned how to do write-ups. And, I had to measure out grams for chemical reactions and dissecting frogs and doing mass transformations in physics and everything. So I grew up disciplined. And the only thing that I'll add that for me, being in an individual sport, because I got cut from high school basketball. I got kicked off the team in football for hitting a guy, even though I was the smallest guy on the team, for taking a guy out in practice because he tried to take me out. Coach gets mad and kicks me off the team. So I had a hard time with the team sports because my freshman year in high school, I was 5'6", 102. By my junior year, I was 5'7", 117. So I wasn't the biggest kid around. In fact, I was the smallest kid who was at the back of the pack, freshman year running track, and just 2 years later, just chasing down all the big guys. So I always lost until I won, but I had passion, and that's the only other factor that I would add to what Dr. Edwards said. I love track and field, and those were the days when guys used to walk around with a basketball and go from park to park and play, have your 3-man team. You just walk around, play ball. I used to do that too, but I just love track and field. I mean, when I got my first pair of track shoes in 1972, that was just the beginning of a whole journey for me. And the way that I got those shoes was that I was really, really good in French. And so my second year in high school, we had about 40 kids whose mom and dads allowed them to go to Paris. So it's the end of my sophomore year. I go to France and I go to Galeries Lafayette, the big store in France, and see these Adidas. My mother gave me money and I said, when I go to France, I'm going to go buy these track shoes from Adidas because you couldn't find them readily in the United States. And I bought those track shoes at, 1971, March of 1971. And I said to myself, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to come back to Europe. And then when John Ekibor won the Olympic Games in 1972 and ran a world record of 47:82, then I didn't know it at the time, but my fate was sealed. So all those different elements coming together and having the parents who had the wherewithal to send me to Paris as a 15-year-old. Cost a lot of money back then and they saved up for it, but that was their gift to me. And I converted, their love, commitment, the discipline, the passion, and everything I learned from them into what I was able to do. After watching Tommy Smith and John and what happened in the 1968 Olympics, because that's what I grew up seeing, along with what was going on in the South. I lived in Ohio, so we didn't have that hardcore segregation and up there, but we saw it on the nightly news every night. I was well aware of it, and just growing up, being a teenager in the 60s was a powerful incentive for me to have a purpose when I went to Morehouse, which didn't have a track, didn't have a stadium, jumping fences for 5 years. So I was doing it for a really, really good reason. I felt that I had a mission that I was on that really went beyond, based on the things that I had seen and experienced and what was happening to our people back then. So those things, that passion, I think, really drove me, and seeing my heroes, Larry James and Lee Evans and all those guys, Ron, and all the 4x4 and the 400 meters and the hurdles. That was something that really just imprinted me for the rest of my life. And I had an incentive to go out there and win, because I was angry, because of, the condition of not just me personally, but what was happening to our people in the country. And that was a huge incentive for me.
Yeah, I have to confess something. I've been around athletics all my life. Even in as a college student at San Jose State. I mean, I ended by 1964, when I graduated with honors. I was on the draft board of the Lakers in basketball. I had thrown the discus far enough to qualify for the '64 Olympic trials. I was on the draft board of the Minnesota Vikings and of the San Diego Chargers in the American Football League. I've been around great athletes all my life. I come to know some great athletes, Jim. And then I see this guy, and he's just running. He's running them 400 meter hurdles. Like I said, man, this dude, and it's consistent. I mean, he's winning time after time after time after time. And so I'm saying, I want this dude tested. That was my response, until I read his story, until I began to read pieces of his life, and to say that Edwin, to say that you was committed, that doesn't even begin to touch it. That you tapped into something that was so deep and so compelling, it almost seemed as if it was a spiritual commitment that you had. It wasn't just, I'm committed to go out and do the best I can every trip. I'm committed. I mean, I've watched sprinters for the last half century. I've seen Usain Bolt. He runs as fast as he can every single race. You can tell he'll be 15 yards out in front of the rest. He runs as fast as he can every single race. And then you come across somebody like Tommy Smith. He didn't run as fast as he could. He ran as fast as he had to. I mean, so he could. I mean, you see different dimensions of athletic performance, and then you all of a sudden a guy like you come on the scene, and it's beyond. You don't win that many consecutive races out of commitment. You tapped into something almost spiritual that compelled and provoked that performance. Meet in and meet out, irrespective of whether it's an international meet or dual track meet, and that was something that I had not seen before, and so it was so when you're being extremely modest to say that I was moved to produce by the circumstances. I've known enough athletes to know. It's like Bill Russell, 11 championships in 13 years. That wasn't about commitment to winning. That was a spiritual thing with him. And he was so into it that when he went to the Boston Celtics, the first thing after St. Louis told him the Hawks are not ready for a Negro player in St. Louis, they traded his rights to Boston. The first thing he told Red Auerbach was, Red, you coach the team, and I'm not going to tell you how to coach as long as you don't tell me how to play center. And at that point, Red Auerbach knew, you know what? This is my guy. he was plugged into something deeper, and I don't know whether it can be bottled or whether it can be taught, but it comes from the inside out. It doesn't come from the outside in, and everybody can't do it. You, Bill Russell, Tommy Smith, I mean, these are extraordinary. You are extraordinary athletes, and it rises to the level of a spiritual involvement. It's not just effort. It's not just hard work. All that comes together and produces something that is truly unique. And it's a privilege to live at a time, to witness that kind of performance. It doesn't happen every generation, and it most certainly doesn't happen with every athlete.
No. And just because you win doesn't mean that you've been in that condition. It's very sad. You can win. There's a lot of athletes who can win and run and break records, but it's what I experienced different. I know it was different.
Yeah, it's a different thing. I've been around champions. I've been around athletes who won, but I've been around a few athletes. I mean, Jim Brown had a spiritual thing going for him. I mean, I remember the first time I saw Jim Brown play in 1965. He came and played the San Francisco 49ers, the Browns did at Kezar. All the players were out stretching and limbering up and everything. And all of a sudden, everybody stopped and turned and looked toward the end zone at the Browns end of the field. And that was Jim Brown stretching and so forth. And I said, what is it about this guy? And it wasn't until I got to know him personally, spend some time with him, sit down and talk for hours, that I came to understand, of course, it's a spiritual thing with him. He doesn't know any other way and will not settle for less. Him, Bill Russell, yourself, Muhammad Ali at a certain level, it was spiritual, and that's different than simply winning a championship or winning 2 or 3 in a row. There's something spiritual about that.
Yep, and Danny Harris and Andre Phillips, who both beat me one time. Fortunately, no one ever beat me twice. So once I beat you, that was it. But I did lose a couple of races in my career. But they both, within the last 6 weeks, asked me what. I felt that you didn't like me and you just beat up on us like that. And was it me? You know, they both of them said, why did you do that to us? And I said, it had nothing to do with you guys. You guys just happened to be on the track at the same time. I said, but my mind was already at the finish line before the race had started, but it was nothing personal. They used to think I was not a mean guy, but they said, Edwin doesn't pay us any mind. He could care less about us, which is true.
Yeah. I had an opportunity. Yeah, I had an opportunity to sit down and talk to Bill Russell once. I said, Bill, there's one question that I've always wanted to ask you. You won 11 championships, NBA championships in 13 years. And he said, okay, what's your question? I said, what happened to them other 2? He said, he looked at me and he said, Harold, we lost. He said, it's as simple as that. He said, it wasn't personal. It wasn't a great failing. We lost 2. He said, but I'm proud of the ones that we got. And even in that loss, we learned, we grew, we became better. So he was still, even in the loss, he was still in that spiritual space where it was beyond just going out and competing. There was something else going on. And unfortunately, most athletes that I've talked to, and I've talked to world champions in almost every major sport, and most athletes never get to that space, which means that they have missed something vital and critical. They have the rings, they have the championships, they have the statistics, but they never got to that space. It's when you see it, you recognize. You can't predict it, but when you see it, you know it. And you're one of those guys, man, that is just, we're just blessed to be around to have witnessed that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
And so, This is such a great conversation. We hate to have to start to wrap it up. We've got Veronica Harris has got a couple of questions, and Jeff's gonna give has a question or two, and then we're gonna wrap it up. Go ahead, Veronica.
Okay. Oh God, I can't wait. I've been so excited. I've been like going through everything. I consulted with some of the best hurdle minds that I know of so that I can make sure I came correct today. But just thinking about the number 9. Hold up, mother, I'm talking. Jeff knows my mom. But anyway, so speaking about the number 9, and you said 9 years, 9 months, 9 days. So of course that set with me. So I just wanted to go and look at the number 9 as far as symbolism and numerology, just something. And so the number 9 is associated with the planet Mars, which also is associated with passion, aggression, and powerful. Dr. Harry Edwards just talked about passion, having a passion for what you're doing, almost at that spiritual level. And that you were so passionate about running. You yourself spoke about that. And with the 400-meter hurdles, there is a certain amount of aggression that is needed. Coaches often say, attack the hurdle. And there is power. Power is needed to move, to navigate those and sometimes move those barriers. And you are also a man of science. And I have a math question for you. And you probably heard this before, but would love to hear your take on it. It's a word problem, which I could not stand in high school, but I'm going to put it to you. So basically, how did you figure out how to run 13 steps through 10 barriers for 400 meters when Newton's first law of motion was working against you?
Oh, I talk about that in my film and give a good explanation. I didn't start running hurdles until 4 months before I won my Olympic championship. That was the first time I had ever run the 400 hurdles. And so being a physicist, you're making a constant 180-degree left-hand turn twice. Mm-hmm. And I mean, just common sense. It was common sense for me that the closer you run to the line, the less you're going to have to run. And those lanes are like 48 inches. So we did the calculations. We found out the radius of the tracks. It's probably usually about 132 feet. And so we did the calculation at 132 feet and then 138 feet. And the difference was like 6 or 8 feet on each turn. So that was the first part of the equation. And so we started figuring out how we're going to steal this distance back without even telling everyone about it. So I was running like 8 inches from the line as close as I could. Also, you're able to run closer to the line if you're a left leg hurdler, because if you're leading with your right leg, your right knee cannot go outside the horizontal plane, the vertical plane. So if you're a right leg hurdler or you run with your right leg, especially on a turn, you've got to run further out. So that's going to cost you more distance. And so I started running hurdles in high school on my right leg, and then I switched to the left leg because I injured my hamstring on the right leg. So I flipped legs and started running hurdles with the other leg because it didn't hurt. So now I'm running with my left leg close to the line, and the hurdles are 35 meters apart. Most people were running 14, 15, even 16 steps between the hurdles. But I was really good at cross country. I did a lot of running up and down hills, running in golf courses, excellent flexibility. I had a whole stretching program. And I wasn't afraid to do 1,000-meter runs, 800-meter runs, 600-meter runs, like 4 or 5 or 6 in a day. So I was always in great condition. So fortunately, when I started running the hurdles, my coach said, wow, I was running 14 and I was alternating. Then all of a sudden he said, I think you can run 13. And I could. It was just automatic. So I was running 13 steps between the hurdles. And if you run an odd number of steps, you use the same leg. So in order to hurdle off my left leg, I had to run either 13 or 15. Mm-hmm. I wasn't running 11. So I had the option to run 15 steps, which was probably how I started out in practice. And then as I got stronger, I started running 13. And then the question was, if you're running 13 steps, can you do that at the end of the race when it gets tough at the 250 mark, or from let's say the last 80 meters from 320 meters down that straightaway. That's the toughest part of the race. So that's how I calculated it out. And fortunately, I was training in a way to put me in a position that I could endure the kind of training that it took to do the 13 steps and maintain. First time I ran at the Florida Relays, the coaches were saying, that's impossible. No one can run 13 steps. And I told them to just go look at the videotape. I had a lot of people who were haters from the very beginning. This guy's from Morehouse. they only run with hand times, and he's running 49.8, but it's probably a 50-56 because the guys are probably drunk on the timing stand. And so I had to earn my way up, but that was my logic. 13 steps. It was odd. Ran it close to the line on the inside of the track. So some of these huge tracks, I figured it out in Rieti, Italy. They have 75-meter straightaways and 125-meter curves. It's probably as large as you're going to get. When you run in lane 6, it's almost like running in a straightaway. And on that track, I was getting like 25 feet extra just by being on the line, by staying on the line, by being in a curve for that long, 125 meters, and you're running 4 feet further out, you're gaining like 12 feet per turn. So for me, I just knew that, and I was able to run races by 10 feet without even putting out any extra effort. And because I was in good shape, when I really wanted to run, then I was winning by 8 meters, 10 meters. So that's how I looked at it. And physiology, my buddies were medical students and biologists and chemists. So we figured out the physiology, what kind of conditioning we needed to do, diet, every stretching, flexibility. So I put together a comprehensive program. I was just into track and field, and being able to go from a guy who ran 51.3 in the 400 flat in high school, and 4 years later I'm running 47.6 over hurdles at a school with no track. So we got to thinking about it a little bit.
That's amazing. You answered like at least 3 other questions I had, because I was like, okay, I wanted to know more about the training, because a 400 intermediate hurdle, that's like, you have to almost have the perfect combination of speed plus endurance. So I was like, well, how are you training for that? Just to get your take on it. And you answered it all, the thousands, the 8s, the 6, and that's what I was expecting to hear.
So the typical sprinters at that time, they were doing a lot of like maybe a 600 to warm. They were doing a lot of 100s, 200s, maybe 300s. They were overloading on the low end. I was tip-top shape with cross country. I would come out into the season and run like 2,000s and 2 600s, like on a Monday. And then on a Tuesday, I'd do 1,000, a 500, and 3 300s. And so I would step it down. And my trainings were, or as I went through the training process, the times always got better and better and better. So I learned how to build up a lot of lactic acid and get rid of it. And I wasn't afraid. Most people, that lactic acid builds up.
Nobody wants, but you nailed it right there.
It messes with your mind. And some people just can't deal with it. It don't feel good. And so I wasn't afraid. And that incremental improvement that I made every meet and year by year, to me, that was worth it. And I started out, I have a saying, I stayed in track and field much longer than people that were a whole lot better than me. And I just caught them from behind.
When you talk about that lactic acid, because when we talked about with that speed, which is that anaerobic, where you're going to really, you're really basically putting yourself in oxygen deficit, and nobody likes that feeling. And you feel that it's a feeling that you never had before. I don't care what sport you play, you never had.
That was my secret weapon.
About it.
That was my secret weapon. Yeah, I was not afraid to go there when I knew everyone else was.
So your threshold for that was definitely a lot higher than everybody else. And it made me think about Coach Moon and how he trains his quarter milers. Like, we were big into cross country and big into 684. That was his business, 684. So what that's about. But I'm not going to talk about that. Let me move on. But that was great. You answered like 4 other questions. Let's just say when you run, I think I got my love of gold chains after watching you run, because you always like had a couple on. But you get the prettiest going over the hurdles. They was like, you weren't the prettiest. I talked to a couple of hurdlers. They was like, nah, you wasn't the prettiest, but you were definitely the most efficient. So I would say, just based on what you were telling me about your calculations, that you worked on efficiency between the hurdles. Would that be a correct statement to say?
Yeah, yeah. And I would say I was much more aesthetic than the average hurdler. Definitely today. They got some guys that run, I call it running ugly. And I don't know how they do it, but I never had a hurdles coach. I jumped in as a substitute my freshman year in high school, or maybe sophomore year, on the 4x120 shuttle hurdle relay.
Mm-hmm.
One guy got hurt, broke his arm playing basketball, and they said, "Who's going to substitute?" I was the only one that raised my hand, and I started the old-fashioned way, just running up and popping up in the air and coming down and running at the next one and going straight up, and I just learned I just loved the event and the challenge, and I knew that there was a trick to going over the hurdles. And Rod Milburn, who became a friend of mine later, I didn't meet him until later, like end of the 80s, but he won the gold medal, and Willie Davenport, of course, won the gold in '68. I was watching those guys, and when Rod, he was one of my favorites in '72 when he ran the gold. He had the big fro with the part in it and the hair slicked back. He was super cool, and that's when I really started I started watching these guys on CBS Wide World of Sports in the summer.
Yes.
And just really got into running the hurdles. But I never had a coach. No one ever taught me how to run hurdles. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I never thought I was like jumping over anything.
Mm-hmm.
I was basically doing I call it an exaggerated step.
Mm-hmm.
I'm never going up. I'm going as horizontal as much as I can. And I knew physics that, why would I want to go up? Because you have to come down. There's braking moments and all that. So I just started working on flexibility and using the exaggerated step to get over the hurdle without going up, and by maintaining my momentum and speed. We did analysis on that and calculations.
Well, definitely. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, based on Newton's first law, an object in motion will continue with constant speed and direction. So you wanted to maintain that constant speed and direction, and not let that unbalanced force, being the hurdle, break your stride or cause you to get out of, you see when people get hurdled and they just make one mistake and they're all over the place, but that's not what you did. So that's very good.
I didn't jump up. I was not jumping up. I was taking off at such a point such that my horizontal path was just like within an inch or two over the top. So I was basically running, and the hurdle was just, it's like an optical illusion. I wasn't jumping over a hurdle. Yeah. For me, it was like it was never there. It was just a motion, the biomechanics. Next thing you know, you're on the other side and still running at a fast pace.
And that's ultimately what all hurdlers aspire to do. That's what you want to do. So you definitely perfected that. I mean, you were definitely a man before your time. I mean, talking about the nutrition, the calculations, the chemistry, the anatomy, all of that. You were definitely about that. But let's talk a little bit. I have one question about, you ran at Morehouse, and at the time you were running, Morehouse was D3. And you set the record for D3 400-meter hurdles, the national record, 48.64. That record is 47, and May 13, 1977. That record is 47 years old.
Is that right?
Do you think it will ever be broken?
It should have been broken by now, to be honest with you, the way guys are running hurdles. But the important thing is that at that track meet, that's where I met Tommy Smith in 1976, May of 76 at University of Chicago. And Tommy sat me. I went up to the top of the stands. When I first saw him, my eyes almost popped out of my head because he's a big dude. And, I've seen him on TV. When I saw him in life, I'm just looking and watching him walk through the stadium. And my coach Jackson, Harry, met him before. Coach Lloyd Jackson, my old coach, introduced me to him and went up to the top of the stadium. And he just sat me down and started talking to me about winning, Olympism, and how to stay calm. He was the first one that I ever spoke to that knew I was going to go. He visualized me winning the world record. And he told me, you're going to have to stay calm, and how to keep people away from you, and how not to have distractions. Yeah, that was the same weekend.
Well, this has been a true honor. Thank you so much for answering my questions. You were so gracious.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to turn it back over to Scott, my great host. Thank you, Scott.
So, Doc Edwards, you nailed it, right? The spiritual. The minute Edwin starts talking about what it is, where Geoff and I are over here just looking at each other, talking about how crazy this is, right? Like, it's clear he was thinking at a totally different level.
Oh, yeah. The great athletes I've been around all had that element of connectedness. Others look for those moments when they are tuned in. Those exceptional moments when they tune in, they can't miss the three, they can't miss this short range jump and so forth. And they'll have space like that. But then there are athletes who win consistently, and it's not about the winning, it's about the process they've adopted to get to that space. And it's almost spiritual. And that's what I look for even when I'm looking at high school athletes, because you can look at some guys and you know that they've been that way since they were 3 years old. They've had a root to that. I mean, Bill Walsh used to say about Jerry Rice and Joe Montana both. You look at Jerry Rice and how he works out, how he prepares, what he's looking and trying to get done. You look at Joe Montana. He said they've probably been that way since they were 2 or 3 years old. So it's not something that you can teach, and in many instances you can't predict it. But you know when you see it, it's almost a spiritual level of passion, commitment, dedication, discipline, and just outright guts, for lack of a better term. And those are the greatest athletes that I've ever come across. And I've never seen a truly great athlete who didn't have that. There are great athletes, but the ones that are truly exceptional, they all have that element. And nobody knows how they got it. Nobody knows, how you can teach it. But if you're attuned, you can spot it. And that's who you want to recruit.
One quick one for the both of you. This is dealing with, I still can't get over 9 years, 9 days, 9 months, 9 days. I got to sip on that one. I tell everybody that because we're here at the Final Four, which is the ultimate in college basketball. But when Dr. Moses ran his races, it was everybody else's Final Four. They were trying to win. So you had to be, for both of you, while you were on top, did you have to think about anything else? And Dr. Edwards, you dealt with some great teams. And while they are on top, did they change anything or did they stay the same? I just read a book about the New Zealand All Blacks. And they were talking about being on top. And you change while you're on top. You can't stay the same because everybody's mimicking you to get you. And eventually somebody's going to get you. So Dr. Moses, while you were in your streak, did you change anything? Dr. Edwards, while you saw the 49ers winning their championships year after year, what did they change? How did they keep themselves relevant to the new situations?
Well, for me,
They never.
go ahead, Doc.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, for me, being an individual athlete and being a world record holder, it gets hard to improve when you're a world record holder. It's very, very difficult. Everybody else, they can improve a lot quicker than you. But I had to change. What I did was I changed not my general system, but I had to somehow convince myself and sometimes even trick myself into doing these workouts on a day-to-day when the lactic acid build up and when you're tired, maybe you have a cold and you get to the line for the 5th run of the day and this is going to be faster than the other 4 and your butt is full of lactic acid and you got 500 meters to go. And so I found ways to convince myself to continue to do it and also just find small areas of improvement. things that I can improve on a consistent basis. I didn't start lifting weights until 1983. From 76 to 83, I had never lifted weights at all. So I started lifting weights in 83. Started running at the beach when I moved down to Orange County. So I started doing small things around the edges, but nothing major. I still got up, went to sleep, ate, got up in the morning thinking about what I had to do and execute it. But so I had to make small changes, but nothing really major. But I still, the will to win was there all the time because I knew that, as you said, Geoff, it was somebody else's Olympic final every day that I ran, every single day. And so even if I was sick, I ran with food poisoning, colds, not feeling good. I knew that, you know, if they know that I'm sick, they're coming after me, which they always did. Yeah.
You know, and going back, whether it's the Golden State Warriors, whether it's the 49ers, you know, whether it's Billy Donovan's team, whether it's another championship team, the one thing that I saw consistently was that the athletes involved, not speaking of the team as a whole, but the key athletes involved always found something that they believed they could do better and improve on. I remember Jerry Rice, who at that time held virtually every record in the NFL. I mean, you talk about wide receiver, people say it comes down to him or Jim Brown, who's the greatest football player in NFL history. But, you know, I would go out on the practice field a half hour before practice, and there's JR out there and paid equipment guy to throw him balls. And I said, JR, this guy's throwing balls all over the place. He said, hey, every ball Steve Young throws is not going to be perfect. I got to go and get that. And he created this challenge for himself. And one of the things that Bill Walsh was always amazed about, he would give the older guys like a Thursday off. They practice on Wednesday. He give them Thursday off, walk through on Friday, and so forth and so on. JR would never take a day off. And he said, because I got things that I've got to do. And he never saw himself as being on the top of his game, even though the team was on the top, Super Bowl champions, repeats, everything else. He never saw himself as being on the top of. There was always something that he could do better, and he would go out and work on it. I mean, it always blew. I never saw him relax. Every time he went on the practice field, he was trying to make the team. As I said, JR, come on, bro. You know, you the man. He said, not yet. Not yet. And I think that that's an attitude that I found throughout. It was the case with Bill Russell. It was the case with Jim Brown. It was the case with Kareem. It was the case with Magic. It was the case with one of the most, when Michael Jordan was playing for the Bulls, they had a game at the Coliseum, and the visiting team always has to come in and do their shoot around early. They have to get up out of bed early and come do their shoot around. Then later on, about 2 hours later, the home team comes in, does their shoot around. So the Warriors had finished doing their shoot around. The Bulls had already done their shoot around and left the gym. And so I'm sitting in the owner's office, and all of a sudden, the lights out in the gym and everything. We hear somebody out there, boom, 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 boom. I say, hey, some idiots out there bouncing the ball, you know, and ain't nothing coming through but the light from the windows outside. We go out there, and there's Michael Jordan shooting free throws and shooting mid-range jumpers. I say, Mike, man, what you doing? He said, no, we got to get ready tonight because, hey, we got a game coming up. He said, some things I got to work on. He's out there shooting the ball after the two teams have done their workout. And he found it in himself to do that. He felt compelled to do that. So I think that that's the difference. And Edwin, you're absolutely right. You're never on top of everything that makes you great. there's always something else that you can improve on.
Yeah, and as Veronica knows, in track and field, we have the saying, "You're only as good as your last race." Whatever you did yesterday, means nothing. Means nothing anymore.
It's phenomenal.
Wrap it up with one last thing. Today, we're here. One of our members of 12 Inches Over is Coach Dawn Staley. So I wanted you all to both just take a moment to reflect on Dawn, what she's achieved so far, and, you know, give her best wishes for us. So we'll start with you, Doc Edwin. Go ahead and give us a message. We know that if once South Carolina wins tonight, Dawn's going to give us a call. We're excited to be able to show her, here's what the two doctors said.
Yeah, I think I met her. She was still in college, probably her first Olympic team. And I was just impressed with her. I mean, I see the energy that she has now. And I just remember meeting that young girl back then who was a badass on the basketball court. And to see what she's done with the team and how she's dealt with those women and the type of leadership that she conveys for them and the kind of results that she gets. I'm just so proud of her. And not to mention the fact that she's actually getting compensated for what she should be compensated. When I heard the news on that, I was like, that's the way it should be. But there's no one more deserving than she is. She's a superstar on the court and as a coach. Unbelievable.
Yeah. The thing I've been so impressed about with her is her grace and her commitment to her team. She's such a wonderful person. I mean, I imagine some people meeting and just immediately bowing from the ankles. I mean, she's one of those people. There's a regalness about her and how she approaches her craft and the clear and evident respect and love that her players have for her. To watch her coach that team during a game is as entertaining for me and as interesting and captivating for me as the game itself, because she's just that much into it and just that genuine. She is sports royalty. And like I say, if I wasn't 81 years old and they wouldn't have to have a forklift to get me back up off the floor, if I ever had the opportunity, I'd bow from the ankles and tell her how much I really, really admire her and what she's accomplished. She's a phenomenal coach. And like you said, I'm glad she and other women coaches are finally getting what they are due in terms of compensation, because as soon as women's sports began to take off a little bit, you found men going in and taking over women's basketball coaching jobs and making that money. But the women weren't making the money who stuck with it and hung with it at a time when people didn't think that women's basketball was even worth watching. So she's right in the front row of my pantheon of sheroes that I look up to and admire so much.
Thank you so much for that. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be with both of you. To hear and to learn, it's just it's amazing. So we thank you for being with us for this championship conversation. Pleasure, and look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Wherever we can. So I know we'll stay in touch. Geoff, I'll leave you with the final word.
Well, just wanted to say thank you. With Dr. Harry Edwards as a hero of so many of people like me. And then I had a chance to have a conversation with Edwin before, and when we first got Dr. Moses on our Zoom, he called me and I said, I got to tell you, I'm a fan. So our conversation that time was fandom. But gentlemen, I can't thank you enough your time. I can't thank you enough for your wisdom. And we're going to keep, as long as you guys answer the phone, we're going to keep calling and hitting you up and figure out some things. Thank you so much.
And I haven't said to them, Doc Edwards, that your grandsons are going to be ready at some point. I'm holding that, but Doc Edwards has some grandsons over in Hawaii. They're a little off the grid, but you see his size, and Daddy is tall too from the Midwest. He's got some boys that are going to be ready at some point, huh, Doc? So,
well, Billy Donovan already gave one a letter of promise when he was born, because his dad's 6'10" and his mom is 6'5", both scholarship basketball players. So when KJ was born, Billy Donovan gave him a letter saying, make sure you go to the University of Florida and hand this to him, because they owe you.
He in the pros now, Doc. He ain't worried about that. They can come check me. He in the pros now.
Well, thanks again. You all be safe. And, of course, go Gamecocks. Appreciate y'all.
Thank you.
All right. And I really appreciate that young lady who came on doing the talking. Did a magnificent contribution. Thank you so much.
Bye.